All right, everybody. Hello. Welcome into the Bible devotion this morning, the Weekday Bible Study. I am so happy that you're here with me and taking part in this study. It's going to be good. We're opening up a new book today. It's New Book Day. Yay for New Book Day! Got my coffee going over here. A little bit of coffee from Yemen. It's delicious. Yemen is where coffee kind of comes from. They have some of the best coffee in the world, and it is delightful. You should try it. It's really, really good. Once again, if a coffee company wants to sponsor my Weekday Bible Study, I mean, Folgers and Maxwell House need not apply, but anybody else that's really good coffee, let's do this thing. Okay, now opening up the book of Judges is a very interesting thing, right? So Judges happens like if you think about major storylines in the Bible. You have the storyline of Moses is a major storyline in the Bible. Obviously you've got Genesis and everything that happens up until that point, but like everything in Genesis really is trying to point us to Moses. It's really getting us to that direction. So Moses is like this major story in the Bible, and then after Moses, you have this Joshua is this like major character, this major story in the Bible. And then after Joshua, you get into the period of Judges, okay? And so the period of Judges is kind of this period of Judges before the Davidic kingdom. And it's the progression of leadership over time, right? Is kind of what's happening here. So Moses was a great leader who led Israel out of captivity in Egypt, out of slavery in Egypt, and to the door of the promised land. Joshua was his right-hand man, and upon Moses' death, he assumed leadership of Israel and led them into the promised land and through their conquests. And then now in the period of Judges, we're going to see some of the conquest continuing. And so as we open up the book of Judges together, what we're going to find is that even though in the very first verse of Judges, Joshua, it's going to say that Joshua's died. But what you're going to find is it kind of writes the conquests that Israel goes through in a more geographic sense than it does in concept of time. And so some of the things that they write about are going to happen while Joshua's still alive. Some of the things it writes about are going to happen after Joshua. It's really only confusing for the first little bit, the first couple chapters. And then after that, we'll be getting on our way out of that mess. But in this mess, if you find yourself confused, because you're like, I thought I read about that in the book of Joshua. If you find yourself confused, it's very possible you did read about parts of this in the book of Joshua. And this is just kind of using parts of Joshua or parts of what happened with Joshua's leadership to help build the tension that it needs to build to get us into the period of the Judges. So understand that before we read any words, okay? It might seem a bit confusing today because you're going to have some things that happen in Joshua. It's just there for tension. We'll make it past that probably today. I don't think there's much more of that tomorrow. And then we will progress forward. We're going to do a big mega chunk today, okay? As we introduce the book of Judges, this mega chunk all feeds in together and is all really important in kind of building the opening story of what Judges is about. So I decided not to break it down into smaller bite-sized pieces. I decided to do one big mega chunk today. So we're going to kind of fly through that mega chunk because I try to keep these around 15 minutes or so. So we're going to fly through that together to get our feet on the ground, to understand what we're talking about in the book of Judges moving forward, okay? Once again, thanks so much for watching. If you like this video, give us a thumbs up. Leave us a comment. I love your comments. If you could subscribe, I would greatly appreciate it. And you can always click that bell icon to receive notifications whenever we go live. Here we go. Judges chapter 1, verse 1. After the death of Joshua, the people of Israel inquired of the Lord, who shall go up first for us against the Canaanites to fight against them? The Lord said, Judah shall go up. Behold, I have given the land into his hand. And Judah said to Simeon his brother, Come up with me into the territory allotted to me, that we may fight against the Canaanites. And I likewise will go with you into that territory allotted with you. So Simeon went with him. Then Judah went up, and the Lord gave the Canaanites and the Perizzites into their hand, and they defeated 10,000 of them at Bezek, and they found Adonai-Bezek at Bezek and fought against him and defeated the Canaanites and the Perizzites. Adonai-Bezek fled, but they pursued him and caught him and cut off his thumbs, ouch, and his big toes, more ouch. And Adonai-Bezek said, 70 kings with their thumbs and big toes cut off used to pick up scraps under my table. As I have done, so God has repaid me. And they brought him to Jerusalem, and he died there. And the men of Judah fought against Jerusalem and captured it and struck it with the edge of the sword that set the city on fire. And afterward the men of Judah went down to fight against the Canaanites who lived in the hill country and the Gib in the lowland. And Judah went against the Canaanites who lived in Hebron. The name of the Hebron was formerly Kiriath-Arba. And they defeated Sheshai and Ahmin and Talmai. From there they went against the inhabitants of Debir. The name of Debir was formerly Kiriath-Sepher. And Caleb said, he who attacks Kiriath-Sepher and captures it, I will give him Aksha, my daughter, for a wife. And Othniel, son of Kenaz, Caleb's younger brother, captured it. That's weird. And he gave him Aksha, his daughter, for a wife. And when she came to him, she urged him to ask her father for a field, and she dismounted from her donkey. And Caleb said to her, what do you want? She said to him, give me a blessing, since you have set me in the land of the Negeb. Give me also springs of water. And Caleb gave her the upper springs and the lower springs. And the descendants of the Kenite, Moses' father-in-law, went up with the people of Judah from the city of palms into the wilderness of Judah, which lies in the Negeb near Arad. And they went and they settled with the people. And Judah went with Simeon his brother. And they defeated the Canaanites who inhabiteth Zapheth and devoted it to destruction. So the name of the city was called Hormah. Judah also captured Gaza with its territory, and Ashkelon with its territory, and Ekron with its territory. And the Lord was with Judah, and he took possession of the hill country, but he could not drive out the inhabitants of the plain, because they had chariots of iron. And Hebron was given to Caleb, as Moses had said, and he drove out from it the 3 sons of Anak. But the people of Benjamin did not drive out the Jebusites who lived in Jerusalem. So the Jebusites have lived with the people of Benjamin in Jerusalem to this day. The house of Joseph also went up against Bethel, and the Lord was with them. And the house of Joseph scouted out Bethel. Now the name of the city was formerly Luz. And the spies saw a man coming out of the city, and they said to him, please show us the way into the city, and we will deal kindly with you. And he showed them the way into the city, and they struck the city with the edge of the sword, but they let the man and all his family go. And the man went to the land of the Hittites and built a city and called its name Luz. That is its name to this day. Now, here's what's happening, okay? So I know that was a whole lot of reading, a whole lot of names, a whole lot of what in the world is going on. I remember, you remember the Lord of the Rings trilogy movies? I remember when they were coming out. I never actually read the books. So secret about me, okay? So a secret about me is that I don't like reading fiction books. I think it's like pulling teeth, right? It's like horrible, okay? I don't like reading fiction books. I just don't enjoy it. I know that's crazy. I know that I should. I get it. I just don't enjoy it. I love nonfiction books. I read a ton of nonfiction books. I just don't like fiction. I don't enjoy it. My brain cannot see the things that I'm reading in nonfiction. I just can't. I don't have that kind of an imagination. And so I don't enjoy it. So I never read the Lord of the Rings books, but I went to see the movies. And so for me, the Lord of the Rings movies was like 9 hours of the same battle sequence until they finally, like, spoiler alert, throw the ring away. They could have done that in the first 10 minutes, you know? Like, I'm just saying. So, and this kind of read like that, okay? And I understand that, especially with me reading it out loud to you. It's like, okay, battle after battle after battle after battle. Thank goodness it only took about, a couple minutes to read all of that. But you don't really get the sense. What I want you to notice, though, as you read those, and you can go back after this video is over and you can reread this chapter. What I want you to notice is in reading those, there are times in which they are faithful to God and the Lord is with them, and they defeat a city or a group of people. And there are times in which they are not faithful to God and they are unable to fully defeat a city. Or perhaps God allows them to defeat the inhabitants, but they don't do exactly what God said in getting rid of everybody, right? They choose to dishonor God's will. And that's really what we're seeing here, right? There is there's this reality that's happening in the text here where sometimes they're honoring God and sometimes they're not honoring God. God's command to them through the book of Joshua and from Moses even was to get out all of the inhabitants, to get rid of all of the inhabitants of the land, to kill all of their buildings, like to destroy their cities in full, so that none of their altars, none of their holy practices, none of their rituals, none of their idols, nothing remains. That's really what God called them to do, was to absolutely destroy absolutely everything. And there are times that they do that, but there are times that they don't, right? Under Joshua, they do that. And it seems like as leadership progresses through the generations, they're getting further and further from Moses, further and further from Joshua, further and further from God, is what's happening, right? So that by the time we get to verse 27 in chapter 1, Manasseh did not drive out the inhabitants of Beth Shean and its villages, or Tanakh and its villages, or the inhabitants of Dor and its villages, or the inhabitants of Iblam and its villages, or the inhabitants of Megiddo and its villages, for the Canaanites persisted in dwelling in that land. Right? Israel stopped doing what they were called to do, so that in verse 28, when they grew strong, they put the Canaanites to forced labor, but did not drive them out completely. In other words, these people who a couple of generations ago were slaves for hundreds of years, they now, instead of getting rid of these people in the way that God has called them to, instead of removing these people the way that God has called them to, they are now turning them into their slaves. Right? When Israel grew strong, they put the Canaanites to forced labor, but did not drive them out completely. Now, by making them become slaves, first of all, why would you do that to somebody if you know, like if you're that close to slavery, why would you ever wish that upon anybody else? But second of all, by allowing them to live and allowing their idols to remain and allowing the way that they worship to continue to practice, they are going to influence society towards their ways, even though they're slaves, right? They're going to have an influence on society. You're kidding yourself if you think, right? You're kidding yourself if you think that these servants, that these slaves are not going to affect your mindset, your outlook, these people who you live closely with, right? Who worship something other than the one true God. They are going to rub off on you. It says, and Ephraim did not drive out the Canaanites who lived in Gezer, so the Canaanites lived in Gezer among them. Zebulun did not drive out the inhabitants of Kitron or the inhabitants of Nahalal, so the Canaanites lived among them but became subject to forced labor. Asher did not drive out the inhabitants of Akko or the inhabitants of Sidon or of Ablab or of Achzab or of Helba or Aphek or Rehob. So the Asherites lived among the Canaanites and the inhabitants of the land, for they did not drive them out. Naphtali did not drive out the inhabitants of Beth Shemesh or the inhabitants of Beth Aneth, so they lived among the Canaanites, the inhabitants of the land. Nevertheless, the inhabitants of Beth Shemesh and Beth Aneth became subjects to forced labor for them. The Amorites pressed the people of Dan back into the hill country. In other words, now they're losing. Now there's so many people, they've disobeyed God so much that now they are losing, right? For they did not allow the Amorites pressed the people of Dan back into the hill country, for they did not allow them to come down to the plain. The Amorites persisted dwelling in Mount Herez, in Ahajon, and Shalbim. In the hand of the house of Joseph rested heavily on them, and they became subject to forced labor. And the border of the Amorites ran from the ascent of Akram, from Salah and upward. You have all of these peoples mixing in with Israel, and Israel really, the bulk of its commands is for Israel to remain completely and utterly pure and unto the Lord. Like, that's the reason why God wanted them to blot these peoples off of the face of the earth. That's the reason why it was so important in their law for Israelites, for people who are Israelites to remain clean. That's why it was so important, right, for them to be healthy and to follow the law. That God is really, really concerned with the purity of the nation of Israel, as that line is going to produce his son someday, right? God is ultimately hugely concerned about their purity, and now they are mixed up together with a whole bunch of mud. When I was doing student ministry, one of the things that we used to do in student ministry that you don't really do anymore, right? Because kids are a little bit different these days. But what we used to do in youth ministries is we used to make a pan of brownies, right? And we would share with the kid our recipes for the brownies, and then we would talk about just the little bit of feces that we mixed in with the brownie batter, and then we would offer the kids a brownie. You know, we would talk about how it's just a little bit, right? Just a little bit of feces, but oddly enough, none of the kids ever wanted one of those brownies, right? Because a little bit makes the whole thing tainted. And here you have Israel living among all of these peoples. Like, this isn't a little bit, this is a lot, and Israel is going to be tainted. Now the angel of the Lord in chapter 2, verse 1, the angel of the Lord went up from Gilgal to Bochum, and he said, I brought you up from Egypt and brought you into the land that I swore to give to your fathers. I said, I will never break my covenant with you, and you shall make no covenants with the inhabitants of this land. You shall break down their altars, but you have not obeyed my voice. What have you done? So now I say, I will not drive them out before you, but they shall become thorns in your sides, and their gods shall be a snare to you. And as soon as the angel of the Lord spoke these words to all the people of Israel, the people lifted their voices and wept, and they called the name of that place Bochum, and they sacrificed there to the Lord. In other words, the people now realized the grave mistake that they made in not following the command of the Lord when the Lord came to them and said, you have caused basically calamity upon yourself. You now have a thorn in the flesh. Now, isn't that true? I find that to be true in all of life. Whenever I know the direction that God would have for me, and I choose either out of urgency, or out of foolish wisdom, or out of pride, or out of cultural reality, I choose anything else, I cause for myself a thorn in the flesh, right? A snare to myself. When God calls us to something, anything, there's a purpose behind it, and that purpose, most commonly, in fact, I would say all of the time, is for our good. It's for our good. In the book of Judges, they didn't follow God's purposes, and it's going to become a thorn in the flesh. We're going to see that play out in the days as we move ahead. I'll see you tomorrow. We're going to continue chapter 2 tomorrow. Thanks so much for watching. If you like this video, give us a thumbs up. Leave us a comment. I love to read your comments. You can always subscribe to this channel. Click that bell icon to receive notifications when we go live. And if you would share this video and just let people know, hey, today's the first day of a new book. If you've been wanting to read the Bible, if you think you need a little bit of help, this is a place to find it. I would greatly appreciate it. I love y'all, and I will see you tomorrow morning.